Greetings. Today we will tour the Pioneer Village at Spring Mill State Park. Before getting started, I would like to encourage you to subscribe to the Mossy Feet Books YouTube channel for more great content. If you like my videos, please hit the like button. The more likes I get, the more YouTube will show to other people, allowing me to grow the channel. I also entreat you to visit my website, www.mossyfeetbooks. There you will find sample chapters, podcasts, a slew of content, and links to where you can buy my books. While visiting the website, you can subscribe to it and receive email notifications of when I publish a new book or other content like this video and podcast. This episode is based on my book, Spring Mill State Park. The first building we'll visit is the nursery school. It was constructed in 1831. The materials used to build it reflect the arrival of the sawmill, as wooden planking was used in its construction. The building has overlapping plank siding, and plaster covers the interior walls. The use of plaster allowed the use of wallpaper. Previous structures were constructed with logs. The foundation of the building is original. However, the 1933 reconstruction used many of the original materials as possible. The Hamer brothers hired a teacher who lived in the building to educate the children. Other children from the village attended as well. The tavern was originally located along Stagecoach Road, and it served as a stage stop for travelers riding along this road. They could partake of food and drink on the first floor of the tavern, while the second floor provided rooms to stay in overnight. Originally constructed in 1824, CCC workers restored the building in 1932 on its original foundation, using logs from the nearby Timothy Murray cabin. The distillery was constructed in 1824, and it's actually reconstructed on its original foundation using logs from the site in 1832. When farmers brought their corn to the grist mill for grinding into meal, the Hamer brothers kept a portion of the meal as payment for their service. This cornmeal they fermented and distilled the resulting mash into a fine whiskey. The Hamer brothers called the whiskey Old Hamer and gained a reputation for being one of the finest whiskeys produced at the time. They shipped the liquor by flatboat as far away as New Orleans. The whiskey distilling operation was quite profitable. The lower residence was constructed in 1818 by the Bullitt brothers, and it first served as the home of Uriah Glover, the mill supervisor. Thomas Hamer lived in the house later on. He would remodel it and add clapboard siding. The 1935 reconstruction used the original foundation and materials that remained from the original structure. The gardens were built in the 1830s and used to grow vegetable crops, herbs, and flowers. A wooden picket fence would have protected the garden from roving animals. During this era, pigs, a valuable food source, were not kept in pens. They were allowed to roam freely around the village and nearby woods as they foraged for food. CCC workers reconstructed the stone fence now surrounding the garden in the 1930s. The garden cabin was constructed sometime in the 1830s near Dones, Indiana, which is in Greene County. This cabin was moved to Spring Mill in 1996. Known as the Ferguson House, the site it occupies previously had a cabin on it, according to old records. The original cabin housed a dye house where workers dyed yarn and fabric. The spring house was constructed around 1840, and it's original to the village. In the area before refrigerators, the cool temperatures inside the spring house allowed villagers to store perishable products like butter, milk, and eggs. The stone wall along the road, it's apparently original to the village, and this would be the Stagecoach Road, which connected Spring Mill with New Albany to the south and Terre Haute to the north. The Stagecoach Trail in Spring Mill State Park goes from Oak Ridge Picnic Area through the Pioneer Village as it follows the approximate visitor path past the concession stand. Stagecoach travel was dusty and uncomfortable. Most stagecoaches seated about 9 people on 3 seats inside the coach. The springless coaches prepared for a rough ride over the dirt roads at the time. The stagecoach acquired its name because travelers completed their journey in stages. Most stagecoach lines had several stops along the way. Minor stops, called swing stops, allowed a stop of about 10 minutes. These were about 12 miles apart. The stage driver had a small brass horn he tooted before arrival to alert to the attendant that the stage was coming. At one of these stops, the horse team would be changed and the passengers allowed out for a few minutes of welcome relief. About every 50 or 60 miles, a stagecoach stopped for the home station. These stations were bigger and usually had a cabin or house for passengers to catch a few hours' sleep and a meal before proceeding on. Sometimes there was a blacksmith on the site. A stagecoach would cover about 120 miles per day. These buildings were moved from other locations. These included the gardener's cabin, which we've already talked about, the upper residence, which we've already talked about. Oh, the upper residence, which was original structure on this site, built by the Bullitt brothers around 1818. This large structure served as a home for the brothers who lived in Louisville as a residence when they were visiting Spring Mill. Hugh Hamer lived in the cabin after the Hamer brothers purchased the village. The structure deteriorated during the years of neglect following the abandonment of the village. The current structure served as a home of Bedford resident John Allen, who constructed it around 1818. Workers moved the cabin and reconstructed it on the original foundation in 1933. The Sheeks House is not original to Spring Mill Village either and was not reconstructed on any previous building site in the park. It was constructed by George Sheeks in 1816, about 3 miles north of Spring Mill on Lick Creek. The Sheek House serves as a weaver's shop in the village. George Sheeks constructed one of the looms as a wedding gift for his wife Elizabeth. The structure was moved to Spring Mill in 1933. The carpenter hat shop. In the 19th century, most men wore hats when out of doors. Hatmaker John Lindsay migrated here from Bono, Indiana. He built a hat shop in Spring Mill and plied his trade as a hat maker. The original structure is gone. The current structure moved here sometime around 1830. The current one was moved here from an unknown location in 1933. Lindsay would have made mostly felt hats, which is made from wool. He would also make beaver hats, which were much more expensive. The Granny White House. The home of Sally Cummins Sutherland White. The Granny White House was constructed in 1824 by her second husband, David White. The dog trot cabin, it was of a style called a dog trot cabin because it's also called a breezeway house because it was common in the hot southeastern United States region, possibly originating in the Appalachian Mountains. The dog trot cabin featured 2 separate log rooms connected by a breezeway. Typically, one of the rooms served as a kitchen and the other as a living space. The breezeway tended to create breezes which would then circulate through the windows inside the breezeway, cooling and ventilating the house. The breezeway also provided a shading area for sitting. These were usually 1-story buildings. However, some were 1.5 or even 2-story. The blacksmith shop was located along this area. The barns were located in this area of the village, serving as places to keep horses, hay, and other things. The blacksmith shop is on the original foundation of one of these barns. Village records do not show a blacksmith lived and worked in the village. However, there are references to blacksmiths coming to the village temporarily to work. The current structure was built in 1931-33 and was converted into a blacksmith shop in 1983. Later built on the site was the summer kitchen. It's a reconstruction of a summer kitchen that was on the site, used by both Hamer families. Cooking was done over fire fueled by wood and was a year-long task. People used summer kitchens to prepare food and keep the heat of the fire out of the cabins. The meeting house was styled after other structures common during the 19th century and was constructed in 1976. There is no record of any church in Spring Mill. The carriage house is a reconstruction built in 1931 on the foundation of a similar structure which was built in the 1830s. Some materials that remained from the original structures were used. The structure served as a place to store stagecoaches and horses when the passengers stayed in the inn overnight. This episode is based upon my book, Spring Mill State Park, available on the website www.mossyfeetbooks. The book is the first book in the 11 Indiana State Park Travel Guide series. The books include information about the parks, museums, historic sites, and many other day trip destinations across the area where the park is located. I encourage you to visit the website and subscribe to it. You can find my books locally at the Walnut Street Variety Shop in Batesville, Indiana. I hope you enjoyed this podcast, and thank you for listening.